I, as a trans woman, am the first ever transgender runner-up on RuPaul's Drag Race. In the past, that has already happened. And so that's what we're talking about. Watching where the conversation seems to pit me and Ru. At first appearance, it doesn't seem to align us, but we are aligned. We have to just all be open to the fact that the spaces that were once reserved for this group or that group, those rules are gone, and we have to change the rules if we're going to evolve.
I'm Evan Ross Katz, Senior Style Editor at Mic. I am joined today by one of my absolute favorites, star of RuPaul's Drag Race Season 9 and the upcoming Head Over Heels on Broadway, Peppermint. Thank you so much.
Yay! Thank you for having me.
Of course. I want to start by reading one of the quotes from the Ru interview. Drag loses its sense of danger and its sense of irony once it's not men doing it, because at its core, it's a social statement and the big F you to male-dominated culture. So for men to do it, it's really punk rock because it's a real rejection of masculinity.
I think drag itself is an FU to not only masculinity, but also gender norms in general.
Learn the tricks, collect the tips, gender flip the script, built legendary status brick by brick, and it did not come from a YouTube clip. New York, New York, New York, we are legend, art, theater, we own everything.
I think that's something that anybody can contribute to. I think the patriarchy needs to have a big FU every once in a while, and I think men can do it in a very fine way as drag queens. Women can do it as well. I think that if we're going to topple the patriarchy, or at least give it a jab, then it can't be something that only one half of the binary does. I think it's something that everyone has to contribute to. It's humanity here, and just as much as being a feminist is in everyone's best interest, men and women, and people in between, it's also giving a big FU to the patriarchy is in everyone's best interest, and it's in everyone's ability. And I think it's also kind of in the mandate, if we're going to get to that point that we want to get to, which is true equality, then this is exactly what we're talking about.
I want to continue on with the continuation of the quote. So the interviewer asked, how can a transgender woman be a drag queen? To which RuPaul responded, it's an interesting area. Peppermint didn't get breast implants until after she left our show. She was identifying as a woman, but she hadn't really transitioned. Is this true?
Factually, it's not true. I mean, look, it's an opinion. I take it as an opinion, so yes, it's true that is RuPaul's opinion, I think. And it's true that I had not yet had breast implants. But, you know, it troubles me for a few reasons. I think it's important that we focus on more than just surgeries when we talk about trans bodies. And when we get into the habit of focusing on surgeries, we do everyone a disservice. And we also don't get a chance to focus on some of the more important stories that are going on, not to mention some of the instances of violence and murder that are happening in the trans community. When we just focus on surgeries, we really kind of boil down the entire conversation to medical choices. And a lot of times, you know, I think what people fail to realize is that for many trans folk, surgery is not always an option. It's not always a desire, and it's not always an option. And so some people may not choose to have surgery, some people may not be able to afford to have surgery. So let's talk about what is limiting trans folk from the access to the surgery in the first place. Because for me, the reason why I didn't have breast implants is because I didn't have enough money. And it was really tough, even as a drag queen, living in New York City, to afford to transition the way that I would have wanted to. So that's what that conversation is really about. I've always been the same person. And I'm the same person today that I was before I went in and had, the day before I had surgery, 5 minutes before my surgery. I'm the same exact person and the same woman, even when I was filming Drag Race. And so I think it's a bigger conversation than just whether someone's a woman or a man based on their surgeries. And we can't really reduce womanhood to body parts, you know?
Was it disheartening to see your body being talked about in a way that you were not privy to the conversation prior to this article coming out?
I wish that I'd been able to have this conversation with Ru before this interview came out, because I didn't have a chance to explain to Rue a lot of things about my transition and how I was balancing, or the tug of war, if you will, between my drag and my transition, my medical transition. And so, it was, I thought that there was definitely a voice specifically in that part of the conversation that was missing, which was mine.
I want to read more of the quote because there's more.
Oh.
Asked if he would accept a contestant who had medically transitioned, RuPaul hesitates and said, probably not. You can identify as a woman and say you're transitioning, but it changes once you start changing your body. It takes on a different thing. It changes the whole concept of what we're doing. We've had some girls who've had some injections in the face and maybe a little bit in the butt here and there, but they haven't transitioned. What did you make of this quote?
I can't really speak for Rue, but I can definitely speak to some of the points that she made. Yes, we all know that there's Drag Race contestants who simultaneously don't necessarily identify. We can assume maybe that they don't, for sake of argument, that they don't identify as trans or as women, and that we know that they've had surgery because they've been vocal about that. I think one thing that's important to know, if we're just talking about people being identified as men or women by someone else, just based on the surgeries that we can recognize, then I think 100% of the surgeries that I've seen, I haven't talked to people about the surgeries that they have, but I think the surgeries that RuPaul is referencing have been for the sake of feminizing the body, and in essence, kind of doing the same thing that Ru says trans women are doing. So I don't think it's, I think we're talking about the same exact thing here. People are getting surgeries for whatever reason, personal reasons, but some of them are doing it to enhance their appearance as women. And that's frankly what I'm doing when I usually make the decision for a surgery that supports my gender expression. And so it did seem kind of unfair. I think it's unfair to hold certain people back just based on their gender expression, whether they're trans or cis, or something that's not yet expressed. That's what I think.
Your original reaction to this on Twitter was just 4 emojis, and there immediately following was this outpouring of love, both from some Ru girls and from the community at large, just saying, "We love you, Pep." It was pretty much the ubiquitous statement in response to your tweet. What did that tweet mean, and how did that response feel?
I had mixed emotions that day, and so the tweet was simply an expression of that. After reading the article and hearing some of the conversation that was taking place subsequently, I had a plethora of feelings. I was frustrated. I had so much that I wanted to say, and I didn't really feel like I had an outlet. I didn't have a voice that was injected into the conversation, or at least introduced into the conversation, because my name was put into the conversation, but I didn't have a chance to actually speak on that. And so I knew that it was important to say something. I was also reacting to some of the Drag Race fans who definitely seem to be true Drag Race fans, drag fans, 100%, but don't necessarily fit into the box that was presented to us in the article. And so I felt for those people. I felt for the gender nonconforming people. I felt for the people who were assigned female at birth. I felt for people who were queer in any other iteration than what was prescribed. And because I felt such a connection to these people, this was unexpected. And I'm certainly not the only Drag Race queen to have a connection with people who are genderqueer or nonconforming or non-binary. But I think my story just resonated in a certain way with certain people. And my experience has been at meet and greets and meeting the fans of Drag Race. So many of them, to many people's surprise, are not just one type. They're not just gay men. It's such a wide array of people and expressions and genders. And I think those people were those people were reacting in a particular way that made me want to express something to them. And I didn't want to make it seem like I was just ignoring the issue and was unaware. I wanted to express that I heard it and I'm going to say something, but I just need some time.
Yeah, I felt that. It was very, yeah. I want to ask next about a tweet that RuPaul issued soon after, which seemed to be doubling down on the original statement. The tweet read, "You can take performance-enhancing drugs and still be an athlete, just not in the Olympics." This really seemed to ignite the conversation in a bigger scope, I felt like, in seeing people, specifically from within the Drag Race community, start to come out in opposition of the original article after that tweet. What was it like for you seeing that tweet and experiencing this sort of doubling down on what many perceive to be a problematic statement to begin with?
I'm not even going to give that statement any more weight or breadth than I think than we need to. I'm talking specifically about what was said about gender and what was said about the show RuPaul's Drag Race. I don't know anything about the Olympics, and I agree that the Olympics should govern their own rules. None of us are in the Olympics. None of us are talking about something else. There's lots of other parallels that can be drawn, and we can read into things, but that's when we have a problem, when we're not speaking clearly about what this is. And so for me, this is simply about the fact that I, as a trans woman, have earned a living for 20 years and am the first ever transgender runner-up on RuPaul's Drag Race.
Yeah, you are.
In the past, that has already happened. And so that's what we're talking about. And, you know, if I'm going to go into the Olympics one day, maybe we'll talk about that. But this is about Drag Race and drag and gender and my contribution to those three things. And it's equal, and they're not mutually exclusive. And I think we have to keep the focus on that. I hope that everyone involved will come to the table and speak about what we're really talking about.
So then we got a rare apology from RuPaul, in which RuPaul issued 2 tweets and also called trans individuals her teachers. What was that like to see that rare apology coming from RuPaul?
It was great. I felt like I admire RuPaul so much, and Ru was really one of the first, as a Black person and as a trans person, but I hadn't really even adopted that expression when I was younger. When I first discovered RuPaul in the 90s, I was instantly enamored by Ru, and I knew that this was going to be someone that I was going to follow and that I might even try to emulate later, you know, as I got older. All this conversation has been upsetting, especially since watching where the conversation seems to pit me and Ru. At first appearance, it doesn't seem to align us, but we are aligned. And I think that's really important. So that apology, I take it for what it is. It's an apology. I definitely think the conversation should continue. I would love to hear Ru's contribution to the conversation, and I think it's necessary that everyone comes to the table with an open heart and an open mind and really takes something away that they didn't arrive with, myself included. And so I think the apology was a wonderful beginning to a conversation that inevitably is going to it's either going to continue and we're all going to contribute and learn from it, or it's going to come back next year. Every single time it's just going to keep coming back. And eventually we're going to have to learn to put down our knives and our weapons and retract the claws and just be open, you know?
Gia Gunn made a video addressing the situation, and one thing that she talked about in the video that I found really poignant was the idea of finding her transgender identity through drag.
For me personally, I found my gender identity through doing drag. Thus, the art form is sacred as it represents my evolvement and self-discovery. As I continue to evolve, so does the art form of drag. And now we have so many different types of drag.
Can you sort of talk about your own experience?
Yeah, we're in a different time and place. And we're in a time right now that we're beginning to be able to have these conversations more openly without being so necessarily as guarded, at least collectively. I know individually, coming to the realization about your own gender or sexuality can be a scary, daunting, terrifying thing at times. But for me, when I was younger, there were no resources. And there wasn't even a drag race. There wasn't even the normalization of, if you want to subscribe to the narrow idea that drag is just a man dressed as a woman, that wasn't even necessarily wholly accepted. And so, by the way, I don't obviously subscribe to that. But as I got older, I realized that the only way that I could express my queerness, my femininity, and my womanness while dressing the way that I wanted to was through drag. I just didn't see the room or the space or the time to be able to tell my folks and my family that I'm a woman and I need to make those steps. I didn't have that ability. I didn't have the ability to speak with any doctor to say, I'm a woman, can you help me make these steps? I didn't have the ability to go into work and earn a living as a young adult and say, I'm really a woman, I need to continue to earn money, please don't fire me, help me make those steps by not firing me. And I did get fired when I was younger. My first real job was working at a bank, a very corporate environment, and Janet Jackson's Velvet Rope had just come out, and I was living, and I had like the red hair and the nails, and I was wearing a shirt and tie because I was following the dress code, but I had on lipstick and like the whole thing, and taste might have been an issue, but nevertheless, I was living my life. And, I got called in and told what an embarrassment I was and that it was unacceptable. And I eventually got demoted and then fired. And that was just humiliating. And then I had to figure out how I was going to pay my rent. And so I went from job to job to job like that until I found drag. And drag was the only thing that allowed me to do all of those things and perform, which is my first love. And it brings me joy. And I think performance, I'm not saying my performance, but just in general, performance and entertainment brings others joy. So
your performance brings the community joy.
Thank you.
It does.
So I found what worked, and I found, I think, what was my calling. And so to hear anyone try to qualify that or take it away, it's a little disheartening, but I just know it's not true.
It sounds like we need a new definition of drag.
Absolutely.
So with that, for all these people that have this narrow-minded view that drag is for men, what can we do to educate them to show them that drag is actually for everyone? How do you define drag?
I define drag now as heightened expression, heightened gender expression for the sake of performance. And that can be anyone. And we all know that drag has already been influenced by iconic people, iconic women, iconic men. And we know that. That's why we have impersonators. That's why there's a million Cher impersonators, but there's only one Cher. And so that's why we have them, because Cher, the cisgender woman who is such an icon, has affected and steered the course of drag. And so she's contributed to it. And when she comes out in a costume, and it's the same exact costume that an impersonator wears, what's the difference? She's a queen. That's a queen, she's a queen. And, just by us impersonating that person and bringing them into this conversation, we are opening the doors for them to be able to contribute and have a voice. Because if Cher says she's going to wear this and that and a black thing with stripes, so will the drag queen. And that's her contribution. So she's essentially designing drag costumes. She is a drag queen. And there's no other way I don't think there's any other way to look at it. Okay, what we want in our community is equality. And that's what we've been striving for. That's what minority groups have been striving for. We are still working towards. And so when we're talking about things like marriage equality, I think it's important that if we're going to achieve true equality and we view the community as outside or we've been othered, that it's really important that we allow other people into the space and allow them access to the same things that we're asking for. If they're gonna allow us into their spaces, then we have to allow them into ours. And I think that's the only way we're gonna have true equality. And so that goes with marriage, it goes with bathroom access, and it also goes with drag, you know?
Does the amount of misogyny and trans misogyny from within our own community surprise you?
No, it doesn't. I see it, I've seen it. Even before I had identified as trans, I felt that I didn't really have a place in the community unless I looked like a certain ideal or a certain body type. And I was certainly very flamboyant and feminine. So I learned very early on, at least in certain parts of the world, in certain cities, and here in New York, that I was not welcome as a person who was soft-bodied and feminine, you know, and then came like the no fats, no femmes kind of movement, and that let me know really quickly where women stood, where people who were soft-bodied stood, where trans folks stood, people who were ambiguous in any way. It let me know where I stood, and it wasn't in a good place. It did push me. It allowed me to kind of put down the I'm not going to pretend to do this anymore, and I'm going to go to where I can flourish. So it helped me in that matter. But it doesn't surprise me that some of those attitudes still linger.
I have two last questions. One is about All Stars 4, or All Stars 5, or All Stars 6. The possibility that so many of us want to see you, Gia Gunn, Jiggly Caliente, so many fantastic performers from the show return. Part of my impression from this quote would seem that you guys would no longer be invited back. What is your takeaway from that? And if asked back, would you want to return to the show?
Well, practically it would be about timing right now, because I have a job right now. But yeah, of course, I love Drag Race. I've always been a fan of it. And I think, I know that seeing some of those, you know, Drag Race in general is about seeing some queens do some great things. But All Stars is about seeing your favorite queens come back. And so all those girls you listed are someone's favorite queens. And so I do think it's important to include them in the juggernaut that is Drag Race. And yeah, of course I would go back if they ever asked me. And I think I have hope that things will change soon.
And the last thing I want to ask, and I think many people are looking to you to really center this conversation, is where do we go from here?
We have to examine how we relate to each other in our queer community, in the LGBTQIA+ two-spirit and more community. I think we have to re-examine our own behaviors and how we nurture each other and how we connect with each other. It was really upsetting for me to be on my feet going to a gay pride rally and then years ago going to a marriage equality rally and walking across the Brooklyn Bridge in heels for marriage equality. I ain't getting married. And then the next day go to a memorial for Elon Nettles, a slain trans woman up in Harlem, and see none of my gay brothers and sisters there. And so I think that's really important. And then more than that, we have to kind of open our mind a little bit to the possibility. I know things are not going to be the way they always were. If they were, then we would not have abolished slavery. If they were, then women would not be voting. If there were, we would not have almost had a female president. So we have to just all be open to the fact that the spaces that were once reserved for this group or that group, those rules are gone, and we have to change the rules. If we're going to evolve, we have to change the rules, and we have to accept that. And change is uncomfortable, but it's inevitable, you know.
Well said. You can catch Peppermint on Broadway. You're about to make your Broadway debut, the first out trans actress to originate a principal role on Broadway. How does that feel?
It feels fantastic. It feels so unexpected. It kind of, I don't want to say it fell in my lap, but I was kind of looking the other way when it happened. And now I've ended up being able to perform and become a part of a fabulous family. It's a great group. I love performing and rehearsing with them. And the material is so timely. This is a story about gender and sexuality and turning over a new leaf and opening our mind, and it just couldn't be any more timely. And it's all set to the beat of the Go-Go's, which is, we're winning, right?
So true. You can catch Peppermint's music on her YouTube page, including her new duet with Caswell.
will transcend, and I'm never gonna blend.
You can watch reruns of RuPaul's Drag Race Season 9 to watch her abolish the runway. You can catch her in a lot of places because she's that talented. Peppermint, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for illuminating us to this conversation, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you, Evan.
Yeah. That's a wrap.